just thinking, and the people will stop.
The mainstream indicates that civilizations that preceded ours fell. But who is the ancient enemy? Is it something that's external, or is it something internal? Is the ancient enemy something that's deep within our hearts and our souls? Or is it an external threat? An existential threat that constantly reappears every so often? Let's find out. We go back to the 5 eras theory, and we know that in the previous eras, each of the civilizations in our 5 eras theory ended for a variety of reasons. We state that this is a major or a hard reset. A hard reset because something changed that caused the civilization to fall. Oftentimes we point to the presence of an ancient enemy. But what is the ancient enemy truly? Is it something that's external, or is it something that's found within each human being? Or is it something that's both? One of the theories goes is that the previous era, the 4th era or the Tartarian age or civilization that preceded ours, was destroyed by some sort of enemy that appeared. This enemy was initially an external enemy, but then it became an internal enemy. Oftentimes people will tell you simply to follow the money. They just say follow the money, and it will lead you to the root of all the forces that control civilization. And this refers to our current era. Did something happen in the previous era, though? What did the news tell us? News tells us to think what we tell you, we're all in this together, do not question authority, do as you're told and you'll be left alone. And oftentimes we have things such as demons are scary and shapeshifters are very scary. What's the point behind all this? They seem to be intending to generate a lot of fear. And fear is something that is existential, and it's also ideal. In other words, there is a real physical fear that something terrible can happen to you, but at the same time, it's also the idea of fear. The idea of an uncertainty. It's the ideas of uncertainty that oftentimes compel us to action. Remember in the film The Matrix when they talked about the red pill and the blue pill. So what happened to the previous civilization? We believe that an external force appeared and the previous civilization managed to defeat it initially during its height, but then this external force changed its tactics and preyed upon the internal weaknesses that had existed in many of the people of this civilization. Now, what were these internal weaknesses? That's what we're going to be exploring. We know in our own current civilization, we believe that all roads lead to the money and the control of money and the influence of money. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because while you can say that if you follow the money, you'll be able to determine who's really in control, is that really the reality that we face, or is that merely the appearance of the reality that we face? We're told in many nations that our politicians have final control over the money supply. They can increase the debt ceiling, they can borrow more money without any fear of limitations, and their banks or their national power will support them in doing this. And on the surface, this appears to be the truth. But what does this really reflect? Who actually has control? The legislatures, the executives, the judicial branches of these various governments? And of course, we're told that some nations have supposed democracies, others have constitutional republics, others have parliaments, and others operate under dictatorships. But the answer always seems to be the same. Just follow the money is what everyone will tell us. Money will explain to you who's in control and how they have control. However, is the supply of money finite? Or is money even real? I remember what actor Jeremy Irons said in the movie Margin Call, when he stated, "It's just money. It's not even real. Just pictures printed on paper so we don't kill each other for dinner or breakfast." Yet this idea exists for all of us as our primary force of control. We all know that we have to operate within the facet of money in order to achieve our existence. But do we have control over money, or does money really control us? It's always a question that we ask, and people always think that you can follow this rabbit hole down and you'll be able to ascertain exactly who has total influence and control over the money. We know that some people are reliant on their paychecks, and other people can simply type a number in the computer, and they've created $100,000 or 100,000 dinar, or whatever currency you're dealing in. It's a constant contest between understanding what the system truly is and what the system can really be. We're dissuaded from asking these questions. And it goes back to what I showed with the news report. Do as you're told and you'll be left alone. Simply comply. It's always easy to comply. It's always easier to consent. It's the path of least resistance. Work a job. And if you want to affect change, then become a politician. All these roads are open to you, at least in certain nations. However, I want you to consider something else. Levels of awareness of means of control. We're only aware of one level, the level of money, where you have to work a job, you have politicians that supposedly have influence over a system, but those politicians can be bought, and yes, that includes dictators. You believe that banks have control over the money supply, and yet there seem to be other forces that may control the banks that we're not aware of. You can follow this all down to achieve the ultimate theory as to one family or one group of families that may have total control over the world. But is this really the way it is, or is this simply one level? Consider that there may be other levels of control that we can't observe. One of our greatest misconceptions, I believe, is that the forces that operate against us in the world have to disclose these things to us. But where is that written as a hard and fast rule? Why would the ancient enemy ever play by the same rules that we do? Perhaps this is merely a misconception that they wish to cultivate, so that we believe that we can determine who's really in control. But we don't see that there are other levels of control that we're not even aware of. And we're going to explore what those other levels of control can be. Yes, you can follow the money, and yes, you can determine or come up with theories in terms of who's in control, simply by following the money. And it may give you an idea. But consider the fact that that's only one level of control. Go up to the next level. What exactly is this physical control? And then another level beyond that, spiritual control. How does that work and what's that all about? There may be many more levels, even above spiritual control. But those are speculated. We'll just stick with these three levels for right now. Consider the existence of Cthulhu, an ultimate evil, something that was posited by H.P. Lovecraft in his works. And yes, we consider the works of horror fiction and science fiction because those ideas were inspired from somewhere. The interesting thing about Cthulhu is it's an ultimate evil that's able to inflict horror, terror, and destruction on a worldwide scale. It's something that has ultimate control and comes from another realm. The dark ones, the deep ones, the ancient ones. All the different names, and all the greatest fears that human beings have ever had. Not just in this civilization, but all the previous civilizations. And whether you go off the mainstream account or alternate research, there have always been adversaries such as these. Every religion seems to have a devil, and every form seems to have some sort of evil, or an ancient evil. However, when we really examine the nature of evil, how often is it that something is truly evil, or is it simply evil because we're told it is evil? We're always told and compelled and incessantly reinforced that we have immediate threats and that we have to act to immediately alleviate those threats. And you can see this from any perspective, whether you're defending your nation or you're defending your own personal welfare in life. Yet Cthulhu is interesting because Cthulhu supposedly has the ability to influence and affect people on the inside. And what does that really mean? It has the ability to change the way people think and operate and believe. And that's why Cthulhu is considered such a dangerous enemy. An ancient enemy that we like to believe that has all this power. But if such an adversary truly exists, and there was this kind of power, how would we even be capable of questioning it? How could a video like this even be made? How could other videos by other content creators that openly question this be made? And there may be an answer. Maybe that's simply what it wants. Maybe it simply wants us to constantly flop around and come up with different theories and utilize our time. We also consider another Lovecraftian creation, the Mygo, a terrifying creature, perhaps even more terrifying than the very large and godlike Cthulhu. The Mygo were an alien creature, and they specialized in feeding on human beings. Even more terrifying, they specialized in experimenting on human beings. And perhaps this is something that you could see with the physical control element. Imagine if there's some sort of force out there that can't be perceived and has the capability of imposing physical control on human beings. It does so by physical pain. It does so by changing the physical nature of human beings. The terrifying aspect of the MIGO was a body horror element, where they could simply remove people's brains and keep them alive. It seems a little cliche now, but when this was new, back in the 1930s and 1940s, this was a terrifying idea to many people. This was considered the very classic aspects of horror, and a lot of people view and see Lovecraft as the ultimate master of true horror, and for this very reason, that the physical control that can be placed on human beings to where they completely lose their will is something that's beyond our darkest nightmares. And yet at the same time, we're very well aware of it, we're capable of imagining it and considering it. And therefore, as terrifying as the MIGO may be, they probably are not the ultimate form of what we might consider the ancient evil, but they could represent some aspect of it. Now, am I saying that in one of the past civilizations there was some sort of creature like the MIGO that came and infiltrated the society? Well, anything's possible. But I think there's something even more darker and more insidious that could have been much more likely. Because even a creature such as the parasitic MIGO can be seen, and they could be detected, and very likely they could be defended against. However, consider the fact that there might be other forces or other creatures that would not so easily be defended against. It was really more the idea of the MIGO that induced fear within people. And it's oftentimes inducing fear that leads to a lot of control, because it's simply the fear of what may or may not happen, or not even the existential fear, but the idea of fear that can be used to achieve control on people. So the MIGO exists as something that is a warning of some sort of external force that could impose physical control over people against their will and force them to do their bidding, while at the same time continuing to inflict eternal torment. And now we go to the origin of all the snake cults, or the natural human fear of snakes, serpents, and reptiles. The natural fear of serpents, a lot of people will tell you, is instinctive. And yet at the same time, famous scientists such as Carl Sagan will tell us that we have a reptilian portion of our brain because of our evolution. Our evolution means that we may have once resembled creatures like this. Now, to be fair, he doesn't show this in his evolution animations. But he does give indications, and he does very clearly state that we have a reptilian side of our brain. In the past, could there have been snakemen creatures like this? Anything's possible. Yet, once again, this is something else that alludes to the idea of an ancient evil. The idea of an evil of serpents that have been with us for all time. We also look at some of the base symbols in religions and in other aspects of society. We'll see that the serpent is very firmly represented. At the same time, you'll even see the serpent in other locations, such as in the medical symbol, interestingly enough. Some people are terrified of serpents and snakes, and other people find them charming and wonderful pets to have. And all you need to do is go down to Florida and go through the Everglades, and you'll find no shortage of Burmese pythons, released as former pets, and now an invasive species in the Everglades. We come back to this idea, though, of why the serpents can induce terror in some people, and why other people venerate them, even worship them, because, once again, you can find no shortage of some certain religious groups who worship the serpent. It has a dual meaning. It can be seen as a power, which people respect, and it even refers back to the god of Set, which is featured in many different pulp fiction stories. And we also see it reflected in many movies, and even as recently as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And I'm talking about the second iteration, well, actually I believe it'd be the third iteration, that came out in the early 2000s, where they talked about the Snake Men and the fact that Snake Mountain was actually the petrified or frozen god of the snakes. We always see snakes and we wonder if they represent the ancient evil that's always been with us, because of their reference in many different biblical texts and other religions. Yet we also have to consider that there's another perception, that snakes really aren't so evil and there's something to be venerated. So what's the final conclusion with snakes? It seems as though it depends on the society and the people. Some live in great fear of them, some have a natural instinctive fear of them, and others see them as companions. Others see them as an element of power or an element of something that shows wisdom even. What do you think they really represent? Let me know in the comments. It's safe to say that there is a lot of snake symbolism that's been with our culture and our society, and very likely with previous civilizations. And we'll be told at the mainstream that the snake was very much venerated by previous civilizations. Why exactly do they do that? Is that from official studies, or is there some other reason for telling us that? You'll see no shortage of imagery that shows what kind of power the serpent could have, and why it was actually venerated as an aspect of life. And yet, other civilizations feared the serpent, and stated that it had the power to consume all life on the lands and across the world. It's a symbol, it's a demon, and yet to others it's a god. So is this some way to determine what the natural inclination of certain human beings are? Or do people simply have different backgrounds, and do they simply look at serpents differently depending on where they come from and what they're really raised to believe? It's hard to say. I will say that, based on my own background, that serpents are considered evil, threatening creatures. And in the course of my lifetime, I've never been personally afraid of serpents when I've come across them. They're just animals to me, like many other animals, to be respected. And at the same time, they do reference serpents in terms of dragons. And considering this fantasy approach, we oftentimes hear of how dragons are related to great serpents, or giant worms. The words and the terms are used interchangeably. So could this be some sort of memory that's endured with us? We don't know. We move on finally to the Hyperion series. This was a science fiction series written by Dan Simmons that posited a utopian society in the future. And this utopian society was capable of space travel. They had a wonderful set of society with many different cultures that were amalgamated and working together. Yet at the same time, there was a devastating evil on the planet Hyperion. An evil that consisted of a killer angel called the Shrike, and also the terrifying creatures of the Cruciform. And we'll explore the Cruciform. The Cruciform was a creature that would attach itself to the human body and acted as a parasite. And yet over time, the longer one was exposed to a Cruciform, their bodies would begin to denigrate and degenerate and lose their identity, losing their identity as an individual person in every way, shape, and form. The only way a Cruciform could be removed from the body was if the Shrike, the angel that existed on the planet Hyperion, would remove it. Now, how exactly does this relate back to our ancient enemy in the old world? Consider the fact that in the story of Hyperion, the Cruciform was captured by the society, it was studied, and they managed to scientifically alter it, because one of the other side effects of the Cruciform was that it would provide eternal life. Now, this is just what the story says. I'm not passing any judgments, but in the far future, the Catholic Church ultimately uses the Cruciform and bestows a Cruciform on a person, in which they're able to remove the effects of taking away the individuality, and the Cruciform enables the person to live forever. The only catch is you have to convert to the Catholic Church. And that's one of the main plot elements in the story of Hyperion. Now consider, in the past, if there was such a thing as a Cruciform, that utilizing the promise of eternal life was used as a means of encouraging people to conform, to consent to a particular power. Here we see the Shrike engaged in battle and how terrifying it could really be, this killer angel. But ultimately this was not the greatest threat in the story of Hyperion. The Cruciform was the greatest threat. An external threat can kill, but an internal threat can control. The Cruciform represented both. It was a parasitic creature that attached itself to your body, and once attached, there was no way to remove it. There were a couple ways, but usually they would kill the patient, and the only way it could be removed without killing the patient is with the Shrike, which is the creature depicted here. In the past, something such as the Cruciform may have been used to achieve control on people, and people desiring eternal life and desiring a life free of struggle and strife may well have accepted this, all at the cost of forfeiting their individuality. And there's a reason why the Cruciform in its presence is considered one of the most terrifying entities. more terrifying than Cthulhu, more terrifying than the Mygo and their external body horror threats. And the reason for that being is we oftentimes see what the true ancient evil is. We start to get an idea of what it's really all about. It's not about all these external threats, all these terrifying monsters and apparitions of snakes and large creatures that can destroy entire lands and entire worlds. It's really about the ability to inflict control on human beings. The ability to use terror and fear to constantly compel people to do that which they may not do without it. And we see this in every approach, and this is something we see throughout our daily lives. And all you have to do is watch the news and you'll be told what you're supposed to be afraid of. You'll be told what you're supposed to think. And you'll be told what it is you're supposed to conform to. Therefore, you can be alleviated of this fear. Yet at the same time, we can also see what this leads to. This leads to a complete forfeiture of individuality. This leads to the desecration and destruction of any of our own dreams or desires. It is not existing in a balance with society, where the society supports the individual and the individual supports the society. This is a society that requires the individual to sacrifice everything to support it. And it achieves this by the promise of eternal life, by the promise of benefits, or now, as it's evolved into, the simple promise that things will not be worse. Things will not be as bad as they were in the past. Because it's never about making things better in the future. It's always about you don't want to descend to how bad things were in the past. How many times are we told that every day? And how many lands are people told that every day? That yes, you may have to sacrifice something, you may have to accept a decrease in the quality of life, but it's still so much better than it was in the distant past. We're never going to descend to how things were hundreds of years ago. Yet at the same time, this is why we have to question what the actual account of the past is. Because the account of the past, whether it's true or not, is used as an element of fear to achieve control. Why do we talk about the cruciform? Because it's an analogy. It's an analogy for how we wish to live an easy life, how we wish to reach our goals, but what are we really willing to sacrifice? And do we ever question that which we're willing to sacrifice in order to achieve our goals? Everybody fears death, whether they know it or not, whether they consciously think on it or not. But because of that powerful impulse and that desire to avoid death. The ultimate irony from the Hyperion story is that the Catholic Church, which promised eternal salvation once you died, ultimately guaranteed eternal salvation by preventing people from dying by attaching this cruciform parasitic entity to their bodies. Did something like this happen in the past? Was this a way in which the previous civilization may have been subverted? It may have been turned against itself? I think there's a lot of inclinations that while this might not have been the exact method, something very similar to this happened. This could well have been the alternate approach that some sort of external force was finally able to use to destroy previous civilizations. And it's safe to say that this ancient enemy could well still be with us to this day. It just operates in a different manner than it did in the past, and yet it still looks to achieve the same ends, the same goals. What it all comes down to is us, every individual. And how is it that we resist something like this? Well, think about what you go through in your daily life. Ultimately, you have to decide what your goals are, and you have to decide what you're willing to make compromises on. Where and what do you grant consent to? Now, it's safe to say there are people out there that want to help you, and there are people out there that don't care to help you, and they wish to hinder you. You have to ask yourself, are people really trying to do either, or are they simply trying to influence you and control you? And if they are, what's the best means to resist that? Because if you have that kind of awareness, it's very easy to resist it. You simply ignore it. You don't have to be rude to people. You don't have to act in a violent manner at all. You simply have to have awareness. Is removing consent that simple? Is resisting the ancient evil that simple? Yes, I think there are a lot of indications that it is, and it could be. Why do you think so much time is spent on getting us to focus on money, on getting us to focus on fears. Fear of being broken, fear of living in a worse state than people did in the past, or fear of what may happen in the future if we don't conform to what we're supposed to conform to. It all comes down to the fact that there are 3 levels of control, and there may be more levels of control. You're able to see level 1, and you can follow it all down to every theory that you have, perhaps even determining there may be existing conspiracies. But what does it really matter if there's another level of control that you can't see? That there are some individuals that are controlled through physical means who don't operate with the limitations of money. And then individuals who are controlled through a spiritual means, who don't operate through either money or physical influences. Consider that. At last, we turn to the example of Spartacus. Spartacus, a movie from 1960 starring Kirk Douglas as the Thracian slave, we're told in the opening narration that Spartacus was sold into slavery by his mother when he was 13. Or actually, I should say he was born into slavery as his mother was a slave, and by the age of 13 he became a slave. But he grew up proud and rebellious. Yet the narration also tells us that he went through his entire young adult life. I believe Kirk Douglas was in his late 30s or 40 when this was filmed. And finally, after accepting slavery for a couple decades, he reaches his breaking point when a friend collapses and he attacks a Roman guard. Now, the movie would have been over if the Roman guard just pulled out his gladius and stabbed him, which we would expect to happen. Yet our official history also tells us that this led to a great slave revolt, which the Romans finally crushed. But what's the meaning of dark technology? I call it dark technology because it's really a way to reference the fact that we have subverted old world technology. Old world technology that was either employed in the current technological tree that we have, or it was something that was abandoned. Now you might notice that we're starting with the topic death ray, and that's referring initially to Nikola Tesla's death ray. And what's interesting about this picture to me, and you've probably seen this picture several times, and thank you for that, Pretend Judge, and welcome to the new member. I appreciate that. But what you notice about this image here with the electricity that I always found intriguing is the fact that someone was able to capture this with a camera. Now, I'm not here to debate the veracity of this image, but there's a lot of rumor and speculation that went around about Nikola Tesla's death ray. And there's even something more interesting about the character of Nikola Tesla. Now, I'll admit I tried a very, we'll just say, unsuccessful foray into biography. It was last summer. I was in the early days of the channel when we looked into the life of Nikola Tesla. And Tesla had an interesting life. And the reason he always fascinated me was because he was one of those figures that he didn't really get a lot of attention in the 1980s. You didn't hear the name Tesla dropped a lot. It was not widely known. Yes, there were people who knew about him. Yes, there were biographers that knew about him. But then it was in the 90s, oddly enough, with the video game series Command and Conquer. And then the next thing you know, well, now Tesla's the great car, and Tesla's a name that you drop when you're referring to technological progress. It's synonymous with that. I mean, let's be honest. It's wondrous marketing. And yeah, if you want to go somewhere, you get a Tesla. But in this image, we see the concept of what could have been a death ray. And this is what Tesla looked like shortly before he passed away in the 1930s. And people like to talk about how he was a pauper and died in obscurity, but he was living in a very nice hotel in New York. And he had a state funeral that was very well acknowledged. And of course, he was remembered. And now the greatest electric car in the land, depending on your perspective, of course, is named after him, at least the most successful one. But what about his death ray? Well, apparently he thought that the technological application of a death ray was some sort of beam of particle energy or a particle beam that could cause the utter physical breakdown of any target that it was directed at. Now, there were rumors that this piece of technology was being developed in World War I, World War II, but what you'll find when you look up in mainstream references to this and the historical references, scholars agree, there was never any definitive evidence about this death ray. That there was some practical technology that could really beam particles at something and cause its physical destruction. Or it's, perhaps you could say, reducing its effectiveness, depending. Now, there were numerous, again, rumors about what it could actually do. What I was always fascinated by, though, is the fact that this topic never really went away. And for those of you who did play Command and Conquer, you might remember what a beast taking on any Tesla coils were. So it's as though in the mind and in many ways, the concept of the death ray lived on. And we'll look at some of the science fiction franchises well before the 1990s where it appeared. It's very interesting. But what are your thoughts on the practicality? Was this just some wild idea and an inventor that may or may not have existed? Was this a piece of old world technology that they were attempting to reverse engineer? Or was this something else entirely? Thoughts so far on the initial impression of the death ray? Space Fraggle, a phaser. Yes. Lord Krug and his phaser. No doubt about it. Oh, yes. Everybody remembers Command and Conquer from the 90s, and that's really when it took off, so. The Alien Empire, HARP-DO weapons. Yes, a lot of rumors and speculation about HARP and direct energy weapons. That's what DO stands for those of you who don't know. Paulie says, it could have been a benevolent piece of technology reversed for evil. Well, it's interesting to think about that with technology, because I think technology itself is a lot more ambivalent. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, and everything in between, and maybe that's the best way to say it. So, Anna, bum my turn coming up on Dart League, only going to catch some of this. Well, that's okay, Anna, you can watch it later, so thanks for joining us. Hey, Fairy Girl, good to see you again, so... And Sky Sage says, just like Benjamin Franklin invented electricity, it was already founded. Yes, and I always found that little account very interesting too, Sky Sage. Yes, Benjamin Franklin invented electricity, Nikola Tesla invented wireless communication, and maybe they did have a lot to do with it for all we know. But it's all a lot of rumor and speculation. Now, you can take this to a real science fiction application, but again, rumors of this just simply didn't go away. The idea was, if there was some sort of death ray, if you will, that could be invented, whether it was a large-scale installation in larger devices or a handheld device like you see here, which you might think of as some sort of rifle or, as Lord Krug Space Fraggle said earlier, a phaser, think about the applications. Now, the promise behind it was that this would stop war. Yes, that recurring theme. If we could just innovate a more powerful weapon, we could stop war. Now, I'll be honest, I was tempted to incorporate some dialogue into the video intro, but I decided not. And the reason I decided not to was I thought, no, technology, weapons, they're a lot more ambivalent than we like to think. But one of the intentions that we have, that's a recurring theme with humanity that I think all of us have encountered, is that if we could just invent a powerful enough weapon, we could stop war. What are your thoughts on that premise? Yes, a powerful enough weapon, that could do it, right? Oh, yes, Rob, you're getting ahead of me right there. Yes, the Star Wars death ray. And it came up a couple different times, didn't it? Adam Bomb says it well. I founded it. The mine is all mine. Never so true. Albie, Tesla had some crazy lasers. Tesla actually had a lot of ideas that were attributed to him. Now, in this particular image, let me get a little closer on it. There was apparently an earlier concept of the death ray from Archimedes. Now, the real Archimedes, whoever that was, and the less said about Dial of Destiny, the better. We're not going to go to that Archimedes. But apparently, Archimedes, again, information that was affiliated with the Library of Alexandria, the library that was burned down, he had a concept for a death ray that was apparently some sort of reflection device. Again, nobody really has the details on it, but a lot of the rumors live on that there was some sort of powerful device that they could mount either on ships or in tall lighthouses that apparently they had all over the Hellenistic world, 2,000 years ago, because apparently it was easy to build back then. Hey, who am I to argue with history? But this principle was already there, which I found fascinating. So Archimedes had a death ray 2,000 years ago, according to official history, and Tesla had a death ray in the 1900s, right up until his death. Although, again, the official position is there was never a lot of evidence behind it. But if there was never a lot of evidence behind it, then why does the idea live on? Well, because we have people with fanciful imaginations and crazy people who just don't know when to say when. Of course, if you would have asked somebody in the 1920s about an atomic bomb, what would they have told you? Oh, it's impossible, it's crazy, it's science fiction. And then all of a sudden it just happened. Anyways, not talking about that right now, but just this concept of death rays. Yes, there's always been a death ray, and we'll look at some of the science fiction examples, but hey, thanks, Morpheus Pill, I appreciate that. So, and Paulie says interesting, and I find it interesting as well because it just never really went away. The idea has always been there. Carol Watson says cities burnt up that way. It's in our collective consciousness. And you may be onto something there, Carol, because when we're struggling to explain the level of destruction that we see with cities all over the land, anywhere, anytime, that's what we have to come up with. What's the explanation? RB, good to see you. The Earth is a reality show for those beyond the ice wall. I don't wonder. And it's not being very well written lately, is it? Robert says the Superman death ray. Oh yeah, there's many different examples of it. So this was the Archimedes principle behind it. Now, oddly enough, going back to Nikola Tesla, he apparently had this concept that in the future, now when he actually innovated this, it's up for debate. Some people say he innovated this idea in the 20s and in the 30s. It was going to be a bunch of wireless controlled devices, wireless controlled airplanes, wireless controlled vehicles, and they would all fight each other, and this would be the future of wars. Now, this isn't exactly what's happened. There's always been a hint that this is what's going to happen, but conflicts continue to this day. We never did exactly develop that weapon that stopped war. We apparently developed the weapon that stopped total war, but we still have regional conflicts, and apparently we still need the soldier with the rifle in their hands. That's the sad story of humanity, apparently. But oddly enough, Tesla innovated this at some point in time, or imagined this, that this is going to be the future of war. Of course, there's always the debate about when drones were first invented. A lot of people think drones were invented in the 2000s. Well, go watch the film Virus that was filmed in 1979. They launched a drone from a nuclear submarine that had Chuck Connors captaining it. Yes, an American, one of the last Americans who played basketball and baseball professionally, who was playing a British naval officer. Anyway, enough about that. But looking at these different principles, though, it's intriguing to think of the applications of this in the past. Is it possible that after the last reset, there were elements of this technology that people still had access to and they were able to employ? Now, we're going to look later at a very well-known, very well-documented, you know how much I love those words, historical example of something that does appear to be much higher technology that doesn't match with the times. But just think of this, that time frame we think of as wooden ships, wooden sailing ships, which, according to official history, was before the United States Civil War, primarily. And imagine coming up against something like this. Well, you have this directed energy, death ray, heat ray, heat ray is the other example of it, and we'll look at that in a moment, but what it would do to these wooden ships. Although apparently if this was a directed energy weapon, some sort of particle beam, what's it really matter what the composition of the ship or building is? If it's wood, if it's concrete, if it's granite, or what if it's something even more advanced than granite, as we always talk about in our explorations? Thoughts on that? Oh, amazing stories. Yeah, that was a good one, KCRI. Very true. Ten Judge, I love Lucius as a film buff. I've watched so many interesting movies lately from his random recommendations. I used to work in a video store, and believe me, Pretend Judge, I watched a lot of bad movies. So don't always take my recommendation, okay? There's my caveat with that. So, Dallas Gunther, Amazing Stories was awesome. Yeah, no doubt about it. Jay Vern, I think lighthouses were our death rays for protecting the coastlines in the past. And that actually makes a lot of sense. If you think about lighthouses having multiple purposes or applications. Very tall, so they're not just airship docking ports. They have that purpose. But yes, you could also mount your defensive, or dare I say, offensive weapon systems on them as well. Quite intriguing. And Carol Watson says geopolymer. Yeah, or maybe even something more advanced than geopolymer. Remember, we just take their word. The people who were informed tell us, hey, it's gold that's on those state capitals. Is it? Well, yeah, because it's much cheaper. So what are you going to do? What are you going to say? Hey, Brian, thank you for that. Archimedes sun laser lens. And that's exactly what it's an example of. The original laser beam. So science fiction concepts that are overlapping with real concepts. Now you're saying, wait a minute, really? And that's just science fiction. Nobody actually made a sun laser lens. Well, actually, there's a couple of examples that we have of some buildings that inadvertently became sun laser lens. And I'm not even making it up. So, I wish I were. But moving on. Yes, of course, we have the Death Star, which of course itself was, your death ray that caused instant destruction. But would you be surprised to know that there's some buildings There's one in Las Vegas, and there's another in London that we're going to look at later, that apparently were able to reflect the sunlight because of all the windows in their construction and cause a reflection that created a very heated area. And in some of these examples, you're talking about the surface temperature getting so hot, depending on whether you're going off the Celsius or the Fahrenheit system. Oh, I love how we have so many different standards for everything. Don't tell me that's not by design. Anyway, the temperature would heat up so much that it would cause damage to the cars in the parking lot. Yes. And so there you have your example, your death ray and heat ray. It was inadvertent, apparently, or maybe it wasn't. Who knows for sure. But then, of course, there's the science fiction example that always comes up. Some sort of flying saucer that's using either a heat ray or a death ray. You might remember in War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells referred to it as a heat ray, although it seemed to be the same thing. So, and thank you, Commander Krug. I appreciate that, Space Fraggle and Space Fraggle. Let me say it properly. And welcome to the new member. So, Sean P. Advanced air conditioning. Yeah, another way to look at it for sure. But you see these examples of how you always have these devices and everybody thinks of them as science fiction. But were they science fiction? Why was there always this focus on trying to create a death ray? Why did this idea never go away? Well, you're asking too many questions, okay? It didn't really exist. I don't know if I'm so convinced. I really don't. Because there's actually a lot more artwork that indicates that this reflection system, I cannot speak this evening, this reflection system was actually in operation. That somebody had built something like this. And given the fact that we've seen this on modern buildings, and while we may not be the biggest fans of modern architecture, it still shows that it is a practicable result that can be achieved. And if you think about it, reflections are not that complicated to achieve, especially with more advanced mirror and more impressive construction that you have behind it. So, Loose Sapphire, there's a great amount of evidence for stone complexes, starforts being floating cities. Absolutely. There's all kinds of wondrous evidence with those complexes. RB, if there's a way to destroy things, humans will figure it out. Yeah, I hate to say it, but you're right, RB. That's that ambivalent application of technology we were talking about. Anyways, so moving on. Yes, I remember this less than sufficient episode of Star Trek Voyager, Bride of Chaotica. They featured a death ray in it. I'm just showcasing it. Yeah, Star Trek Voyager, referencing Star Trek. It was an okay series. It was one of the holodeck fantasies. I think it was, Captain Paris when he played not Captain Paris, Lieutenant Paris, when he played Captain Proton. I was never really a big fan of Tom Paris's character. I didn't dislike him. It's just the character never really grabbed me. Anyways. But here's an example of one of these structures, and you can get an idea of the way that it could reflect light. Now, we'll come to one of the most notorious examples here in a second, but I've had a couple commenters tell me, well, if you just go to Vegas, you'll see some old world architecture there. Yeah, right. Yeah, you'll see a lot of, how shall we say, counterfeit in Vegas, counterfeit, trying to appear like the old world. But for me, it's not very convincing. I mean, it's Vegas. Everybody knows what it is. It's lights in a desert, and it's where gambling is legal, and it's where many other things are legal or illegal. Anyways, but that's the most notorious example. Now, back in the 1980s, some may remember that there was the whole Star Wars program. Yes, and if you've ever watched the film Spies Like Us, they parody it quite interesting. But one of the intriguing premises behind it was they were featuring a death ray. This is the way that we're going to destroy all these satellites, and it's also the way that we're going to achieve a true nuclear deterrent. We're going to be able to shoot down intercontinental ballistic missiles with these lasers. And I found it interesting that a very interesting parody movie, Spies Like Us, with Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, basically made fun of the whole concept for 2 hours. During the height of the Cold War, no less. I guess it did come out after the day after, and maybe everybody needed a laugh because things got serious. But so it's another application. Yeah, they'll just say it's laser weapons. It's not a death ray. Well, it's kind of the same thing. And then, of course, there's the heat ray that was featured in the War of the Worlds film. Now, the War of the Worlds film in the 1950s was always very intriguing because it updated several of the concepts, or maybe you could say it applied some other older world concepts. Because if you read the original War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, the tripods were on 3 legs. Whereas in the film, They were actually more like some sort of advanced delta wing configuration. And then, of course, they had the neck and the device that dispensed the heat ray and destroyed everything. And oddly enough, they seem to be targeting old world architecture, especially in Los Angeles. Quite an interesting film. I can certainly recommend it. So, even from the 50s, it still stands up to this day. Sean P., much better than the awful modern one. What'd you talk about? Oh, I didn't even know they remade it. Okay, enough of my bad jokes there. So, but anyways, yeah, I mean, Marilyn, love the War of the Worlds. Yeah, the 1950s film. It was made with a lot of class, and it had a lot of hints in it. A lot of interesting hints in that film. And that's one of the reasons why that tends to be an idea that we go back to a lot in these explorations, the original War of the Worlds. There seemed to be something more going on there. Yes, of course, I couldn't resist but put in the original image of the tripods, and who knows, maybe in the past, or maybe at some other time, both of these devices were attempted. So you had the death ray, the heat ray, you had the walking tripods, and then you had the hovering ones. And yes, don't worry, we'll be looking at hovering technology here in a moment. But the whole concept, though, of actually having a targeted death ray, a heat ray, or some sort of particle energy weapon, I'm trying to remember one of the later episodes of classic Doctor Who, I think is Remembrance of the Daleks. They actually gave a very detailed description of the effects of the Dalek death ray. Yes, the Daleks, the creatures, they weren't robots, they were actually creatures with armored bodies that traveled around, and they looked like giant salt shakers. Like this, in this little modified image from Genesis of the Daleks, one of the finest classic Doctor Who episodes, I thought. One thing I always found interesting, though, and I actually preferred the older special effects, because when someone got hit by the death ray, they would glow white, and then they'd instantly die. There was something really disturbing about it. It was just like on classic Star Trek when someone got vaporized by a phaser. They just disappeared. And, you could say, well, they had technological limitations. These were very low-budgeted TV series at the time, but there was something almost more disturbing about how that happened at the time, because maybe it left a little bit more to your imagination. A little bit more of the imagination that you're looking at some kind of older, more advanced technology. And of course, now when you look at the current version of Doctor Who, it's a lot more gimmicky. When somebody gets shot by the death ray, you see the skeleton. I don't know. It almost feels a little too comic book to me. But, I'm sure it's still a great show. I just haven't watched it. So, anyway. But moving on past that, I want to look at this example. Now, this building is called the Walkie-Talkie Building in London. This was constructed in the mid-2010s, about 2015 if memory serves. And apparently the company that originally contracted it to be built went defunct, and then it was purchased by some food company out of Hong Kong. Very interesting. But we're in London, United Kingdom. And this building actually won an award, the Carbuncle Award, for being the worst piece of architecture in London. Yes, I'm glad to see someone still... Never mind, I probably shouldn't finish that idea. You can look it up yourself, the Walkie-Talkie Building. What it was famous for, though, was after they constructed it, there were reports that it reflected the sunlight, and there was damage caused to several cars where the sunlight was being reflected to, because the temperatures on the ground and the surface reached over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And the company ended up paying damages to the people whose cars they damaged. Now, they say that they had some measure that they were going to incorporate in the construction that would mitigate this reflection effect, but they just didn't do it. Isn't it a lovely building? Yes, the ways that we build nowadays. Tristan, looks like a standing wallet. Yeah, Walkie-Talkie is probably giving it too much credit. Calvin looking for Hobbs. Looks like bad AI art. Yes. I don't know. Maybe it was an early edition. Who knows? Yeah, no doubt about it. So anyway, these are practical examples, though, with these structures that we have, where you can achieve this destructive effect of a death ray, of a heat ray. It doesn't have to be some sort of fancy, incredible piece of technology. Here, from what we're informed, when these buildings were built, whether it's the one here in London, the Walkie-Talkie Building, which still stands, by the way, or any of the buildings in Las Vegas, this was an inadvertent effect with this reflection of the sunlight causing this destructive effect. You're heating up a surface point to 200 degrees? That's rather serious. Now, that segues very nicely into our next concept, the sun gun or the heat ray. Now, let me transition images here. Give me one moment. And let's pull up our Sun Gun Heat Ray. This is a very interesting little account. And you might recognize this initial image that I'm about to show. And here we come. And you may recall that this is the Icarus from the James Bond film Die Another Day. The Icarus itself, of course, being a reference to the Diamond Satellite, as they called it, from the earlier James Bond film, and dare I say better James Bond film, just my opinion, Diamonds Are Forever. And no, that was probably the least of the Sean Connery James Bond films, but enough of that. Anyway, the whole concept being is that they had this ability to generate with a satellite, or we could just say a device that's at a high altitude. Maybe that's the better way to say it. It just depends on your perspective. That could generate all this energy and this destruction. But would you be surprised to know that in World War II, one of the super weapons that the Third Reich had come up with was actually a sun gun? Was anybody aware of this? A piece of reflection technology at this level. Yeah, really a directed energy weapon using the energy of the sun, apparently. Now, this was never completed. This was merely an idea. You know, here you're looking at the Diamond Satellite, as they called it, from Diamonds Are Forever, but the principle's the same. Now, what exactly is the sun? Well, we can debate that till we're blue in the face, but apparently, if you have the ability to generate or reflect the light and then augment it with another source of power, you can achieve some very destructive effects. And this whole concept of this sun gun was considered a wonder weapon. And there were a lot of wonder weapons that came out during World War II, apparently. So, RB, never heard that one before. Yeah, and you know, that's what makes it a little suspicious. Is it something that really happened, or is it something that came later? Not really sure. So, yeah. I mean, and it's not something that we really talked about, you know, when I did the World War II lesson plan, but apparently it happened. Apparently it came up later. So, again, not really sure what to make of it. You know, there's a lot of different signs that it was just a concept and it never went any further beyond that. But I'm not really sure. And I just wanted to feature it, though, because Atom Bomb never completed it in the movie. Yeah, true. Pretend Judge says it looks like a ceiling fan. Yeah, I'm not really sure about the practicality of it. I really am not. You know, was it just something that somebody had an idea for? There was a lot of strange things that happened after World War II. But when you see that there were buildings that could achieve the same effect that, quote unquote, is very well documented, and of course, you know, if you take a mirror and you reflect intense sunlight, you can achieve an effect. So if you think about this and you think about other forms of technology augmenting this, other forms of technology that we might say is alchemical technology, maybe there's a way you could augment this beam, this energy, these particles, whatever you want to call them, to be even more powerful than you can begin to imagine. Then suddenly the principle for destructive application goes off the charts. Suddenly you can explain the vast destruction that we saw in all the cities with all the incredible concrete, all the amazing masonry, at least that's what we think of it as, being utterly destroyed and annihilated. Not necessarily by fires, but by some other force. Now again, it's speculation, but there's a lot of clues that point to it. So it just continues to raise those questions. Here you go, Jamie. I melted rocks with small Fresnel lenses. It was a fun thing to do in science class back in the day, I recall. Hey, New West Reset, thanks for joining us and welcome. But anyway, that's the story behind the sun gun. So let's go on to our flying saucer hover technology. Oh my gosh, Aurelian's going to flying saucers? I didn't know that was going to be in here. Why are we doing this? Well, I've got a good reason for doing it. Because you might be surprised to know that flying saucer technology is a little more practical. Does anybody know what we're looking at here? Let's see if we've got any aviation enthusiasts out there. And we have looked at this before. Hey, Lori, good to see you. Clara. Dang, all I ever did in science class was borax crystals. Well, you know, it just depended where you went to school, I guess, so. You're not far off there. You're not far off there. Commander Krug, you're close. Oh, RB. It's a plane. Yes, you're right. It is a plane. Oh, there we go. Tuner machine. It's his Messerschmitt. I cannot talk tonight. It's hilarious. Yes, Messerschmitt Me-262. First prototype German jet fighter. You are correct. And actually, according to official history, this was the first jet fighter in World War II. And according to official accounts in World War II, it completely outperformed anything that the Allies had at that time. However, it entered so late in the war, it didn't make a difference, and the Allies figured out how to target it when it was taking off or landing. But they didn't ever try to go toe-to-toe with it in aerial combat. There's apparently a couple examples of Mustangs being able to shoot them down, but they're very, very rare. So that's okay, Commander Krug, you were close. Yeah, the Comet was another example of what they were experimenting with. But anyway, just think about this. Official history tells us that the Wright brothers invented flight. We'll just discount balloons and everything else, but they invented glider-controlled flight. And then 40 short years later, those Germans are making jet fighters. That's what the official history says. That's some tremendous scientific progress, wouldn't you say? Now, they went even further. This is the Horton-Ho 229. Now, the Germans never really got this finished, but they were building models of this. And if you look at this, you notice that it kind of looks like that manta ray configuration that we saw from War of the Worlds. Very fascinating. And this was an official design. And if you look at this, this is something that's completely advanced and beyond its time. I mean, something that just 40 years after flight was invented, they were already doing this. So very, very fascinating. Now, after World War II, there was a follow-up, not by the former Allies, well, actually one of the former Allies, the Soviet Union. They followed up on the design of the Me-262, the swept-wing jet configuration, and developed what's known as the MiG-15. And the MiG-15 was fielded in the Korean War, much to the surprise of the Allies, or the United States and the UN. The United States got surprised a lot in the early Cold War. I guess that just happens a lot for whatever reason. They say it was an intelligence failure. Yes, so those Soviets decided to design a jet fighter that the Germans were already using that the United States military had already encountered, but they were still caught by surprise 5 years later. Yeah, don't ask me to explain it. It's one of those things. So they had to develop a design to counter it really quick. So what's this all have to do with flying saucers? Well, just bear with me. I'm getting there. So anyway, the United States military in the 1940s had decided to evolve its strategic bomber because, remember, the official history tells us that the United States was the only nuclear-armed nation in the late 1940s, at least until 1949, although they never threatened to really do anything with it, and they developed the B-36, the Convair Peacemaker, or as they like to call it, the billion-dollar blunder, because it was a propeller-driven plane. Subsequently, they never fielded it in combat during the Korean War because there was fears, probably rightfully so, that the MiG-15 would have utterly annihilated it. B-29s they fielded haven't had enough problems. So just a few short years later, they developed this, the B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber that was fielded in the 1950s, and guess what? It's still in service today. Now, yes, the United States Air Force has the B-1 and the B-2 bombers, but the B-52 is still in service. I would call that a successful design, wouldn't you? I always found that interesting. But moving on past that, it was during the time frame after World War II that there were a lot of design plans for flying saucers. Now, a lot of people say that these flying saucers were just simply rumors. But there was a lot more going on than just rumors because you don't have to look very hard, and you'll find numerous blueprints and design concepts for these flying saucers. In fact, they're a lot easier to find than blueprints and plans for many of the old world buildings that we look at. Oh, and by the way, you'll get multiple perspectives of these plans too. So as I'm fond of saying, make of it what you will. So, physics is about to change for the better. Well, I hope you're right. Jamie says Operation Paperclip. And what Operation Paperclip was, for those who don't know, it was the Soviet Union and the United States offering amnesty to the German scientists to work for them after the war. That was the official explanation. But as always, maybe there was something more extensive going on. So, and Philip I says it, the classic UFO, the unidentified flying object. Yes. So true. But what's interesting about it is you'll see many different variations of it, especially from what was considered the high point of the UFO craze. So, what was really going on? Was it just people seeing things in the sky and their imaginations running wild with them again? And remember, we have the mystery airship sightings from the 1890s. So, this isn't something that happened, well, it was after World War II and everyone had Cold War panic. That's what they try to attribute it to. But you look at all these different designs, and here's some of the blueprints that you have. There are multiple blueprints and multiple patents for flying saucers, and this is probably one of the more dramatic ones if you look a little closer, that are actually still logged to this day. Ah, yes, someone just tells me, just consult the patent office. That'll answer all your questions. Yes, once again, I consulted the patent office, and instead I'm left with thousands of more questions, much like when I see photos of the construction of Capitol buildings. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe I just have a problem. You can let me know if you think I do. RB, we get the leftovers of more advanced societies. I don't wonder. I really don't wonder. Or something that we just really don't fully understand. So, Sky Sage. What did Oppenheimer say? I'm the bringer of death. Seemed many people were, in a lot of respects, so. Oh, Brian Ditmore. Centennial Falcon. Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. But for whatever reason, the whole concept of the flying saucer, and we'll say hover technology, was considered very advanced. Now, some people say it's anti-grav technology. There's different ways to phrase it. Is it anti-grav? Is it hover? Is it some way to repulse yourself from the ground? Like they have repulsor engines in Star Wars. Maybe they all apply. Not really sure. And here we have the great Avocar. Or was it Avrocar? I always mispronounce this one, and sometimes intentionally, but oddly enough, a flying disc that was contracted out to Canada to construct, design, and build for the United States Air Force, United States Army. So very interesting, right during the height of the Cold War, and officially they were contracting out defense contracts to a Canadian company. Not very American. Why was that happening? But according to official accounts, it never really went anywhere, and it was not a successful design. But it is very well documented, and everybody can find test footage of this. So how practical was it? Not really sure. Yeah, exactly. It's all bearings, no doubt. Well, New West Reset. Maybe that's just because the United States military always had so many problems when they went north that they knew they should ask the Canadians to build their great advanced technology. Maybe that's what it was all about. Anyways, so little joke aside, though, you look at some of the examples of this, and you can find the video footage that shows them actually testing this, that this seemed to have a hover capability. Now, of course, what we'll be told is it's a vertical takeoff and landing, VTOL, and Harrier jets have it, and other jets have it to this day. The F-35, yeah. Never mind that the F-35 was not featured in the new Top Gun movie. But it's interesting when you think of the fact that this is very well documented, the Avrocar, and how close of a practical concept it was. It is legitimately a flying saucer. Now, what the explanations are behind the technology, why would anybody want to devote the time and effort and then run a contract like this out to a foreign country? Now, yes, of course, the United States and Canada, great allies, World War I, World War II, and beyond. Yes, we know this. But it's really bizarre that they went this far with this. Now, was this just the disclosed technology that they were showing us? And there was even greater technology behind the scenes? Thoughts on that? Is that a possibility? Oh, there you go. Looks like that robo vacuum cleaner. Yeah, good one, Nomi B. It does. Texas Redneck Hippie is just an inverted Hoover vacuum. Hey, let me tell you something. Don't go bad mouthing the Hoover vacuum. Those things stand up to a lot of punishment. You see vacuums today, they fall apart as soon as you take them out of the box. But that Hoover, you can bang it on the wall many times. You'll tear your house down before you pull that Hoover apart. Jamie Davern. Oh, yeah, well, It is a very pretty red car. Kathy, even greater tech behind the scenes. Ah, yes. And there's no doubt about it. Because, secrecy is just part of maintaining certain things. Now, oddly enough, the United States and Canada weren't the only nations trying this out. This is apparently a Romanian device that was fielded and tested. Oh, very interesting. Another little flying saucer. And look, Romania can do it too. Although who's to say it was limited? The other interesting thing, though, is that there are a lot of details behind the concept of the flying saucer, as though the entire anatomy of it, the design, is very well thought out. Now, of course, we can say, yes, I can look up and I can find technical schematics and plans for the USS Enterprise, a Constitution-class starship. And of course I can. And maybe that's the explanation behind it. Although, I always found it interesting that the original Enterprise, Constitution class, don't call it a Connie, I hate that. The Constitution class from the 1960s, I'm just kidding, I don't hate anything. The Constitution class starship looked like a UFO. It looked very, very advanced. And indeed, I remember that original series Star Trek episode where they encountered the United States Air Force and said, hey, the Enterprise is a UFO. Well, yeah, it looks like a UFO. But you'll find no shortage of examples of diagrams and plans and very, very well thought out concepts. And notice here we have multiple perspectives. And remember, it's difficult for us to find multiple perspectives of buildings that are standing to this day. I mean, some of them are there, but a lot of them tend to look like recordings. Now, are these the same thing? Are these actual designs from the ground up? Or are these other recordings? Was this somehow preserved technology that's still out there? Is it hinting that there was something more advanced in the past? Thoughts on that? Sky Sage references Project Bluebeam. That's a good one. Robert, sport model. Yeah, it's definitely the sport model, no doubt about it. But this just never really went away. This whole concept never went away. Now, here you see the Avro cars, and this was the U.S. Army application for it. Put a couple bazookas on it. Although, I don't know, those bazookas didn't do so good against the T-34 tank in the Korean War, but, it's a discussion for another time. Maybe they'd put something else on it. But they'd really gotten to this concept of employing this. Now, back years ago, when I was still affiliated with the United States Department of Defense, it was a long time ago, they were always talking about the Army after tomorrow, and one of their concepts was hover tanks. And you might remember they had a giant piece of artillery called a Crusader, and then they had the Comanche helicopter. None of those weapon systems ever went into production, interestingly enough. It's supposed to be a real leap forward in technology, but then it just didn't happen. And of course, the reason will be, financial limitations. Of course, financial limitations didn't stop 2 wars in the Middle East, and it didn't stop the development of the F-35. The trillion-dollar plane. Anyway, less said about that, the better. But then you'll see other things like this, where you seem to have legitimate sketches that, is it more than a UFO? Is it a flying saucer that actually had a practical application? Is it somebody's imagination? I mean, here they say, Air Force flying saucer. So clearly somebody had the idea that they wanted to design, construct, and employ flying saucers. Now, is it possible that they might have really gone further with this, that somebody really was close to having mass production of flying saucers, and that's what we were actually supposed to see in the aviation pinnacle of technology in the 1960s? Or were they just not able to reverse engineer it? Thoughts on that? They just didn't have the technology. Jamie, the orbs look alive, not like tech. Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of times they do behave that way as well. Jamie, TR-3B drive systems are based on Vimana Mercury Vortis tech. Seems to operate very similar, too, from what we understand the Vimanas to operate as. And go ahead, hit me on the pronunciation of that as well. I'm totally cool with that, so. Pretend Judge says possibly just tech us peasants aren't privy to. Well, you know how it is. It's just like the airship. Nobody's really keen on us being able to fly around and go where we want, when we want to. Especially without some sort of economic constraint, right? It just works that way. I'm sure it's all just a coincidence again, We come up against those a lot. Well, thank you, my friend. New West Reset, and welcome to the new members. I appreciate that. So, Spirit and On. I saw a triangle UFO in 1997. First one I saw. I've encountered a lot of people who have seen UFOs. And just because you see a UFO doesn't necessarily mean it's aliens. But it's funny how we try to affiliate that. We try to control the perception. There's a lot of guidance that goes into that. So I always found that very interesting that we go so far with it. But, like Project 1794 here. I mean, you've got cross sections and everything, and, whether these are blueprints or whether these are actual declassified documents. I mean, who knows for sure? Of course, you could always say it's just misinformation that's being put out to the public. All possibilities need to be taken into account. I'm just interested by the fact that, again, much like the death ray, the idea and the concept of the flying saucer and hover technology has never really gone away. It continues to stay with us. And of course, I, had to bring in a still from the miniseries V from the early 1980s, because here you're talking about much larger flying saucers the size of entire cities. And maybe that's where you're seeing some links back to when we looked at the airships. Were the airships deployable from flying cities? Were flying cities a thing in the past? For that matter, did they actually have entire land masses that were flying? How far did the technology really go in the past? We have a lot of clues that indicate that it went very far, that there were no limits on what you could float in the sky. Now, of course, you say float. I mean, what are you really talking about? What's the method of propulsion? What's the method of levitation? Anti-gravity device, or something that just causes you to move up in the air? Many, many different theories and concepts. And of course, what we understand, what science tells us right now, is the limitation is we don't have a powerful enough engine that can suspend that much weight or propel that much weight into the air. And of course, the official explanation is gravity. That's why we see the cool Starship tests, and sometimes they explode, but it's all good because we're informed that it's entertaining when they explode, apparently. I guess, as long as nobody's hurt, and then you have these other concepts. Now, what would it really mean if you had a civilization in the past, a human civilization, of course, we're not talking about aliens, at least not what we think about as aliens, that had achieved these levels? What would it do? What would be the point of having these kind of city saucers, if you think of them that way, that float? What would that safeguard you from? And yeah, I know I'm really going out there, and that's okay. I do that a lot. That's what I'm supposed to do. Let me get caught up here. Philip I. Blimps are similar to UFOs. Yeah, no doubt about it. Sean P. Independence Day is so copied. Yeah, I recall that when Independence Day came out, the Sci-Fi Channel, back when it was the original Sci-Fi Channel, they re-aired the V miniseries. Fairy Girl, have you ever looked up the Vril Society in regards to UFO technology? I think they figured it out. Somebody may have figured it out. Although the difficulty with that, and it's the same difficulty that you have when you're trying to research anything like Operation High Jump, there really is very clear, legitimate misinformation. Things are very obfuscated. So, RB. Yeah, where's Randy Quaid? He'll sort everything out. Crazy to think that was a serious movie in the 1990s, too. But then you compare and contrast that with the actual images that we have of UFOs, where it looks like someone just took a plate and threw it in the sky and took a picture of it, or maybe it is legitimate. Who's to know? Who's to say? I mean, the Avro car was a real design, and there is footage of it. And they came very, very close to apparently succeeding with it, but then for reasons they dropped the project. But it's another example of the reality, the fantasy, the information, and then, of course, the misinformation all blending together. And so what do we have with that? Well, we have a very confused account where we may have devices like this. But, of course, we'll be assured, no, of course we don't. Nobody would lie to you. We would never lie to you. Oh, all right. Well, except in cases of national security, then, yes, we have to lie to you. But you understand why. So, and everybody wants to say, well, I just refer to this government organization or that government organization. They're behind everything. Yeah, okay. Government organizations that are also notorious for years of incompetence, too. Well, everything's just blended together and overlapping. And I think that's the real intention. It becomes very, very difficult to even figure out exactly what's real. You question that which is real. But you have to, because if you don't, you can suddenly find yourself led down the wrong road very quickly, very easily. And so that's why trying to untangle this very deep web is difficult. But it's not impossible, because you can figure out exactly what happened and what didn't happen, especially when you go off of your own experiences. But you have to start with a place on where you're going to trust things. So where do I trust things? Well, it seems as though there are a lot of examples of more advanced aviation technology through the years. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking also about in the past. I mean, no one ever matched the SR-71 Blackbird, and the official explanation was, well, we didn't have to because we had satellites. Okay. It was rendered obsolete. It's very interesting what we said was obsolete. And don't go bother asking why the Concorde got pulled out of service. Well, because it was too loud. And who the heck would want to travel from Europe to the United States in 3 hours anyway? Crazy people, that's who. Floating while sleeping, yes, ever so true. Yes, and another one of these USAF projects, United States Air Force. So was this just something that they were throwing out to the people to keep them confused, or was this actually a practical concept that became very close to being pulled off? Don't know. But it's just interesting that there's a lot of examples. Oh, by the way, on that whole concept of UFOs from the Third Reich, yes, you can buy your model kit apparently with different types of markings. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. It's just fantasy, you know? Oh, and look what we have back here. Oh, it looks like a Horton Ho 228. Or I'm sorry, Horton Ho 229. And then some B-29s. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. The crazy world we live in. Philip, I saw an airship in my dream last night. Oh, yeah. Albie Belt, video game? Well, you know, I mean, video game, plastic models, you can do all the above. So, Jamie Griffin, yes, Iron Sky. So the ideas have always been there. Now, who's to know, who's to say? How far did they really go with it? But again, like the Death Ray, the idea is there. You go back and you watch the original War of the Worlds, a film from the early 1950s, and the idea is very clear. Well, it was aliens. Okay, was it? Is it? Was it in the past, or is that just a convenient way? It's funny how they always want to point the finger at extraterrestrials. Well, maybe they are visitors, but not visitors in the sense that we think of them as. But that's another exploration for another time. We're just talking about the technology for right now. And when you watch War of the Worlds and you just see how helpless the human technology of the 1950s was against this technology, it gives you an idea of what the practical applications may have been. Hey, thank you, New West Reset. I appreciate that. Hold on, let me get that up there. Who had the color flying disc tech, the U.S. Navy or the USAF? Oh. Or who had the cooler flying disc tech? Sorry. See, I'm losing my mind tonight. I think when you look at practicality, it was probably the United States Air Force, at least in terms of the designs. Now, in execution, maybe it was the U.S. Navy. You know, of course, there's that debate in terms of who has the better aircraft, you know, United States Air Force, United States Navy. Good old inter-service rivalry. Dion and orbs. Yeah, I mean, there's no limitation for the applications behind this. So, could you please explain cattle mutilations? Come on, they want a late night snack? Cattle mutilations. Sounds like just something else to keep us scared in what's going on. I think if you think about it, you can figure out what's really going on there. Alien Empire, if they were ours, they would attack Russia. Well, who knows? You know, it's odd the parity of technology that occurred after World War II. Very, very odd how quickly that the superpowers achieved a parity in technology. So, like I say, make of it what you will. All right, so let's move on to unified field theory. And we've got an interesting one here. Now you're probably thinking, what the heck is he talking about? Unified field theory. Something I've actually talked about before, and it's something that's come up a few times. The unified field theory that is attributed to Albert Einstein, but a lot of people have looked in the unified field theory. And it goes as follows, that there is a theory that all forms of matter, that everything can be explained by one single theory. And for those of you who are joining us, please hit that like button, and I appreciate you joining the channel. And what you're looking at here is the USS Eldridge from the eponymous Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia experiment, which was a rumor and an urban legend according to official accounts,
Let me say that again. The Philadelphia experiment is a rumor and an urban legend. Official history says it did not happen. Now that I've got that out of the way, the individual who is attributed to talking about the Philadelphia experiment changed their story and backtracked on it numerous times. And what it was a test on a United States Navy destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, during World War II, where they were going to render it invisible to radar. Well, apparently they ended up, and again, this is all rumor, speculation, urban legend, they ended up doing something much worse. In other words, they either transported it to another reality, transported it through a portal to another dimension, or completely rendered it invisible. There's all kinds of rumors. Now, again, officially, it did not happen. It's been discredited. Okay, I've said that enough. But there was a film made about it in the 1980s called The Philadelphia Experiment that laid it out very well. It starred Michael Parr and what was her name? Nancy Lou. No. I'm trying to remember her name. The one who played RoboCop. Nancy Allen. There we go. Nancy Allen. See? Nancy Allen, who was in RoboCop, played Lewis, Murphy's partner. Both of them were wonderful in this film. And oddly enough, Michael Parr did a remake of it on the Sci-Fi Channel after they changed the name to SYFY. Don't ask me why. And the remake was nothing like the original. Watch the original in the 1980s. It's a wonderful movie. But you get all kinds of different theories in terms of what happened. You know, did this event really happen? Well, it sounds like it's something that would really happen. In World War II, this mad rush to design these super weapons. I mean, we had that crazy Reich that was developing all these crazy weapons. So, of course, the Allies had to develop their own weapons. And utilizing the unified field theory to render a destroyer invisible on radar, well, that would give you all sorts of advantages. But then there were all sorts of rumors of terrifying things that it did. Well, by utilizing these magnetic generators, and the rumors state that these generators messed with the magnetic fields, apparently. But nobody knows for sure. It's just rumor and speculation. But again, it's another one of those accounts that just doesn't go away. Now, thoughts on that? She was also in that De Palma thriller. Great movie. Oh, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful performer. And for that matter, so is Peter Weller. All right. There you go. I said it. So, Robert, neutrinos. What a concept. And it may have involved something like that. I mean, nobody knows for sure. So, I think you're meaning toroidal energy and vortex math? Maybe it had something to do with that. Maybe, again, it was some other technology that we have no idea what it really was, and it's just a name for it. You know, it's unified field theory, you know, because if somebody actually heard about this and they had no idea what was really going on, they didn't know the quote-unquote details, or as we like to say now, the science behind it, then you're going to assign some term. And the fact that they assigned a term like this, unified field theory, well then, to me, it gives it more credibility. Vaughn mentions our friend Brian Dunning, Mr. Skeptoid himself. Yes. And remember, as Brian Dunning says, it's always a conspiracy theory unless it involves his finances. Then it's a legitimate conspiracy. And I think that's enough said about him. So, RB, once I fuse with my couch, but that's horse of a different substance. And that is actually what they say happened to this. So when this destroyer escort was sent wherever it was sent, when it came back, there were rumors that the crew were amalgamated into the hull. And I'm not going to show any more of the terrifying images that they have, because there are some horror images from multiple films, documentaries, or at least what Brian Dunning would call pseudoscience and pseudo-documentaries, because they didn't tell the truth about the crew being amalgamated in the hull. Nobody really knows for sure exactly what happened, but again, these rumors persist. There were even rumors that the entire crew were taken off into isolation and lived essentially as lab rats for the rest of their lives. Just rumors, of course. I mean, it's not like the United States has a reputation of treating its veterans poorly now, does it? So, anyways, rumor story. Now, go forward to the year 1980, and we have another science fiction film, which oddly enough makes references in the plot to the unified field theory, and that film is called The Final Countdown. Made in 1980, starring Martin Sheen and Kirk Douglas, a U.S. aircraft carrier, the United States, or the USS Nimitz, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, one of the great supercarriers of the 70s, goes back in time from 1980 to 1941, when it goes through time travel, or as the film depicts it, a strange storm. And a lot of the dialogue that Martin Sheen says in the film, he's a Department of Defense observer apparently, who's evaluating how the crew performs. He states that Einstein proved time travel was possible, in theory. Or, again, he's referring to the unified field theory, the same theory of everything that applied to the Philadelphia experiment. That, remember, didn't happen. And remember that this is just a movie. This didn't happen either. But oddly enough, it had the full cooperation of the United States Navy in its production. Isn't that odd? The final countdown. Oh, yeah. End up dogfighting zeros. Oh, you're right there, Calvin looking for Hobbs. And don't worry, that actually makes another great point. But in the film, they go back to 1941 and they have the chance to stop the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So, alleviate the United States military from one of its unfortunate surprises. Here you've got Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen, Captain Yelland and Mr. Lasky. I think that was Martin Sheen's character's name. It's been a while since I've seen it. Really interesting scene, though, when they go through the storm and they go back in time. And then, I'm not going to spoil it for you. They have the chance to stop the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. There's a very interesting scene, though, from the movie. This is actually a production still. And you have F-14s, modern air superiority aircraft, going up against Japanese Zeros. Now, of course, that's not a real Japanese Zero. That's a Viz-modded trainer from World War II U.S. vintage, but it's mocked up to look like a Zero. And in the film, you're talking less than 30 years of difference in technology. The F-14s easily destroy the Zeros. It's not even a contest. Well, of course not. You've got jet fighters against a propeller-driven plane. But roll the clock forward to 2022 when Top Gun Maverick came out, and you've got an F-14 going up against an Su-57 Felon. Now, of course, if you talk to any aviation experts to this day, they'll tell you, look, it's just a movie. There's no way an F-14 could ever go up against an Su-57. Su-57 has a better avionics package, it has superior radar, and it could destroy the F-14 beyond line of sight. All true. Of course, we're never going to get an example to find out. It's just rather odd to me, though, that even in films, I know they're just movies. Of course, they're supposed to suspend disbelief. Although some movies suspend disbelief a little bit more than others. It's odd to me that we have one film with 50 years of difference between the technology, and yet we're supposed to take credibility that it was possible that this fight could occur. But then in the final countdown, less than 30 years between the technology, and it's a curb stomp battle. No one would ever think in a million years that a Zero could go up against an F-14. And nobody would think that Tom Cruise could take his P-51 Mustang and go up against an F-14. Not a chance. So, as I'm fond of saying, make of it what you will. Kryptonic Time Rider, The Adventure of Lyle Swan. That's actually a great film. I'm glad you mentioned that. I haven't seen that in a long time. Everybody rented that one back in the day because of the great cover art, though. So, who knows? All right. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of a 2-minute break here. But before we go on break, make sure you hit that like button and support the channel. We got a couple more topics we're going to look at for technology. And don't worry, we're going to get to the frequency technology. I'm saving the best for last, though. Although, really, I think all this is the best. So, prior to going on break, hit the like button, and we'll see you in exactly 2 minutes. So, thank you. Be back in 2 minutes. All right, and give everybody a chance to get back on. And we're going to go to our next topic, mega armored vehicles. It sounds kind of absurd, but it's really not. Anyways, so in review, we've looked at death rays, we've looked at heat rays, we've looked at the sun gun, we've looked at hover technology, we've looked at saucers, and we've looked at unified field theory. Now we're going to look at mega armored vehicles. Now, you're probably wondering, well, why are we looking at mega armored vehicles? What's unique about that? The first thing I'll tell you that's unique about mega armored vehicles is the fact that somebody ever actually built them. So, let's take a look. What have we got? Now, it seems like it's just a concept. All right, it's science fiction. It's something from Warhammer. Nobody ever built gigantic armored fighting vehicles. What would be the practicality behind that? Why would anybody have done that? Albie Belt, Knight Rider was real. Yeah, I think in some respects it was, in a lot of ways. And Sky Sage talks about it. The Panzers, the tanks, the concept in World War II of armored fighting vehicles getting much, much larger than they really were ever supposed to be. There was a board-playing game, or actually it was a role-playing game, back in the days before the internet and video games, called Ogre. It was designed by Steve Jackson, and what you had was this concept of a cybernetic tank that was, we'll say it was controlled by computer. Nobody said AI back then. And they were tanks that were almost autonomous, and they took part in this great science fiction war. Now, again, here you can see how these ogres compare to a modern M1 Abrams. Oh yeah, the current U.S. Army main battle tank, designed in 1979, and just like the B-52, still in service. Not quite as old, though. But where does it all come from? Well, you might have heard of this. This is the Heavy Gustav, the German artillery, railway artillery. Again, the Third Reich added again in World War II. It fired an 800 millimeter shell. And this was a real gun that was built and constructed and employed, namely in the Crimea during the Crimean campaign of World War II. Now, I'm impressed that anybody, was able to build and field something like this, and field shells that were 80 centimeters. Now, how large is that? Well, you also look at the other concept that the Germans, and remember, it's really weird. World War II is strange because the armed forces of Germany were hyper competent at one point in the war, and then they were hyper incompetent at other points in the war. It's really, really strange. Now, of course, you can attribute it to, well, leaders went mad, and that was the reason why they suddenly became ineffective. But they apparently wanted to design these crazy weapons, this gigantic tank, this Panzer that was going to be over 1,000 tons and have 3 massive treads on it. But it apparently was a practical design. And keep in mind that the Heavy Gustav really was a weapon that was constructed and built and employed in combat. And nobody else had a gun that was that large. Of course, towards the end of the war, it was again obsolete because we had nuclear weapons. And so who needs a large gun like that? But just the fact, though, that they were able to do that, I find that very impressive. I find it impressive that someone was able to build a vehicle that large, whether it was on tracks or what have you. Robert talks about it. The rail guns, the V-2 missiles, the aircraft that we looked at earlier. And all this was again done in a very short amount of time, 1920 to 1940. And, don't say anything about computers. Here's another view of how that gigantic tank would compare to the Panzer Moss. Just humongous. Now, of course, you would say, well, it's not practical. It would sink into the ground. Yeah, one would think. So wouldn't somebody have figured that out, though, prior to building it? I don't know. It's really, really strange. And here's what one of the massive shells looked like. And here you can see some service members next to it, just to give you an idea that, no, this was not just a mock-up. This really happened. And so I find this very intriguing. And here you can see the artillery ammunition comparison. And again, there's never been a shell that compared to it to this day. And you might remember in our early technological exploration, when we explored Tech Revolution, we looked at the modern naval artillery. At least the leap forward, if you will, from the classic naval artillery of our old cannons or the exploding ammunition that they had. So it's all just an interesting concept and a premise. And yes, you can still see this one here in the museum in London, quite interesting enough. Apparently next to Steve McQueen. Very interesting. But not so many images of this heavy Gustav that give you an idea of its size and immensity, but just imagine if they had built that tank. Now, of course, you would think, well, it's going to be vulnerable to air attack and so on and so forth, and yes, it probably would. And there's many famous images of it, but you look at all the resources that went into constructing this and pulling this off. But what this does tell you was at one point in time, it was possible to do this. Now, of course, you'll say, well, we just don't do it now because reasons. It's too difficult, so on and so forth. But very impressive from my perspective for the 1940s. The only thing I think is more impressive than this achievement is the United States Navy rapidly fielding all the aircraft carriers that it did from 1942 to 1945. Now, am I questioning it, or is it one of those clouded things? I think it's one of those clouded things. I think that we do have examples that, however it happened, the disclosure, or perhaps we should say the recovery of old technology, did enable some achievements to be brought about. But, if we look at this technology and we compare it to what we see with some of the structures that we had or may have had, again, there's really no comparison, because I've seen what modern artillery does to cities in current conflict. And guess what? It doesn't exactly do what we see happen to those cities in the past and all those photos from the 1800s. So it's very, very strange. It's a very strange discrepancy, if you will. So, Albie, how quickly did they build those weapons? It's a great question. And it's the mother of all conflicting accounts, if you will. The United States built 24 Essex carriers in just a few short years. Gigantic fleet aircraft carriers. So, very, very interesting. What's Jamie have here? Military black science is always 50 years plus ahead of mainstream. And maybe more. And maybe it's even more confusing than that, Jamie, for all we know. So, it just gets to be the ultimate confusing account with mega armored vehicles. Was there a time in the past when the Ogre was something that was a reality? That they had an incredible tank that really was automated, much in the same way that Nikola Tesla talked about. It's rather odd that here we are in 2025 and our automation is limited. Like even the drones don't fly themselves. They're controlled by operators and flown by wireless. That's what we're informed. So it's all very, very intriguing. And I just thought I'd include this. This was the United States Army response to the very large German tanks that they were building in World War II. This is the T-28. Here it is in Fort Knox back in the day. This was before Fort Knox became the Human Resources Center. Yeah, even the United States military operates under Human Resources. May as well just call it like it is. Yeah, massive 4-track vehicle that they tested a few times at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, but wasn't very practicable because it was too heavy. So was there something else that we don't know about? Not really sure, but it is interesting to really think about. And Jamie says it right there. Confusion is key to control. And that's what we get a lot of. So was there some other technology? Was there a way to build a lighter vehicle? Or was there some other propulsion technology? Not really sure. Definitely a lot of clues and definitely a lot of hints. So let's move on to one of our very unique historical mysteries, if you will, the concept of Greek fire. And who here has heard of Greek fire before? Let me make sure I get the right images up here. We've talked about this a few times, but this is a very interesting anomaly from history, if you will, especially when you look at who is attributed to have had Greek fire. Now let's see if anybody's gotten it in the comments. Marines heard about it. Sky Sage, Dark Necessities. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now, isn't it? So, Greek Coherent Sunlight. Oh, Salone Pierce, Wildfire. Yeah, Wildfire from Game of Thrones. That's one way to think about it. So, anyway, for those who aren't familiar, Greek fire is basically a flamethrower that was employed, according to official historical accounts, from 600 to 800 of our current chronology. Who knows for sure? It was used by what we call the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, the Byzantine Empire was a name we associated with it afterwards. You know, those historians going back and renaming things from what they really were. Yes, I just said that. But the odd thing was that this was a weapon of devastation, a flamethrower, basically something that projected napalm over 1,000 years ago. And it was invented by some strange recipe that was found by a Syrian guy who was in the employ of the Byzantine military. And they used it to defend Constantinople. It was a game-changing, decisive weapon. But there are multiple accounts that they had this technology. And of course, much like with many other forms of old technology, Damascus steel, so on and so forth, we don't know exactly how they did it. And oddly enough, this is something official history corroborates. We don't know the secret to Greek fire. I'm rather amazed that they admit that, but probably figure, well, you know, it was 1,000 years ago, who's going to ask questions? I mean, we've got modern flamethrowers, but the accounts of this is that this was a much more terrifying weapon than modern flamethrowers. That this really was like the quote-unquote wildfire from Game of Thrones, if you think of that equivalent. That this weapon would actually light the water on fire, and even the water couldn't put it out. That it was really more of a chemical weapon, something that was beyond the imagination of terror. So, now, of course, the term Greek fire is rather odd because the Arabs that it was employed against called them Romans. They didn't call them Byzantines. And the Byzantines weren't really Greek. So I don't know if, again, it was something that they were assigning names to or what. So, Alina, I think it was cool how people could walk a tightrope in the past. Yeah, that's really what we're seeing here, too. But what I find interesting about this... Ooh, Carol. Yeah, plasma fire. Vaughn, they say Greek, but honestly think it's much older. And Jay here with a question. What happened to the ancient Greeks and Romans? Died out? Don't really know. Maybe that's just how those people from that time frame are described to us. That's what I assess. But I could be wrong. Maybe they did die out, or maybe they just fell into the actual lines of history. Christine. Calcium and polythene. You know, there's actually modern applications, apparently, that come close to it, but apparently nobody knows how they really did it. Michael says, Greek thermite. Yes, thermite plasma. We need to use it to bomb Alcatraz. That'll neutralize the VX gas. Anyway, don't need to reference any more movies. But there's a lot of references to how terrible this weapon really was. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Apparently, in numerous museums, you can find grenades. Yes, you heard me correctly. Grenades that were filled with this Greek fire and would be lobbed at your enemy. So very, very interesting. Or if you think of something like a plasma grenade. And apparently there are some designs and attempted schematics to figure out exactly how they did this, but to this day, nobody knows exactly how they did it. They can't replicate Greek fire to this day, just like they can't replicate Damascus steel. I thought this was an interesting one because here you have one of these quote-unquote grenades that kind of looks like an owl. Who do we associate with the owl? Maybe that had an entirely different meaning. So very strange. Greek fire grenades. And you'll find them all over the place. And they have different names, and they're in museums all over the place. Oh, yes, the museums who we can trust to keep an official account of history. There's also these other odd images that we have. Now, you could just attribute it to artwork that show the destructive potential of this Greek fire. Now, just imagine this. If this is what we think of it as being, could this be one of the explanations for the destruction that we've seen in the past? If this Greek fire was really as destructive as the official historical accounts state it is. Well, Sid, maybe it was there, but it's certainly not there now, is it? How can we test that soil in South America, but we can't replicate? It's a good point. That comes up a lot. Yeah, there you go, Vaughn. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it, Fairy Girl. So I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure if it was possible, but this is what you tend to get from it. Give me 1 second. But there's actually a lot more artwork that still alludes to the destructive potential of it. And you see something like this, and this does give you that hint that maybe this was one of the means in which the old world buildings were destroyed. The application of Greek fire. The columns, the pediments, whatever the actual construction material was, if it was something more advanced than what we think of as marble, limestone, granite, so on and so forth, or even advanced concrete, you're going to need a very advanced destructive weapon to truly destroy it in the manner that we've seen in those images. Now, of course, we have every reason to question the images, and you're right, they don't provide any final conclusions, but they do provide a lot of hints. So, it's or, just read that Roy Bradbury book. There's also some interesting images like this that show the naval application of it. Now, were they just fighting on sea or were they fighting on land as well? Not really sure. But Greek fire is definitely one of those things that's interested me. And where do you think George R.R. Martin got the idea for wildfire in Game of Thrones? I mean, there are a lot of actual historical, quote-unquote, applications in the TV series and the books. And, maybe one day he'll get the inspiration to finish it. Then again, maybe not. Not my concern. So, anyway. So that's all we have for Greek fire. And now we're going to move on to the concept of the Doomsday weapon. Wait a minute. The Doomsday weapon? What exactly does he mean by that? Well, let me get up these images here. The Doomsday weapon. And no, this is not the last, but it's close to the last. Now, we talked earlier about how there was this concept that if we could just develop a more advanced weapon, we could achieve peace. Well, that's what the Doomsday weapon was. And of course, I use this game playing card just to kind of show it because it's the idea that matters. It's a weapon that, when employed, will really cause mutually assured destruction. And oddly enough, there's been numerous references to mutually assured destruction. And one of the film examples came from the film Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And if you're not familiar with the original Planet of the Apes franchise, Charlton Heston, an astronaut goes forward in time, he doesn't know it, on Earth 2,000 years in the future, finds out that simians or apes are now the primary civilization. In the sequel, they send a, reduced version of Charlton Heston to find Charlton Heston, played by James Franciscus in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and they find that there is a portion of human civilization that survived. In the story, there was a nuclear exchange that destroyed human civilization. Interestingly enough, though, when they go to New York City, it's set in St. Patrick's Cathedral. They replicated the cartouche in this scene where you've got Dr. Zaius and General Ursus standing. Yes, very, very interesting, isn't it? And here we have our doomsday device, the Alpha Omega bomb. And the Alpha Omega bomb was simply a bomb in the Planet of the Apes franchise that when detonated, it was a cobalt-salted bomb. It would incinerate the entire land, the planet, whatever you want to think of it as. And this is what it looked like. Very interesting imagery from the movie, though, because you got the Alpha and Omega, and then it's set up by a pipe organ in what used to be St. Patrick's Cathedral. I wonder, is that a coincidence? New West Reset. Yes, the most famous quote from it. And there's a lot of different theories about it. Atom bomb. Mutually assured destruction makes me mad. Probably the best way to refer to it. Yes, indeed. But I always found it intriguing that they had this idea of this doomsday weapon, and according to the official account, Charlton Heston didn't want any more sequels, so he said, just have me set off the bomb and there won't be any more sequels. Well, they found out by doing more time travel. And here's the scene from it. A lot of interesting melted concepts to be seen. Yeah, they say it's from a nuclear war, but when you look at the remains of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and you can look at the interior of St. Patrick's Cathedral now, again, very, very interesting that they have the Alpha Omega bomb, and this is the Doomsday bomb, set up right by the organ. Very interesting. Interesting film as well. And then, of course, there's the concept of the Doomsday Machine from Star Trek, the original series. And I only reference that because, well, one, I think it's the best episode of Star Trek ever and probably always will be. And I do prefer the windsock that was covered in concrete because, you know what, it was a real object. I know they redid the effects, but I still prefer the original 60s effects. That's okay. You can say I'm sentimentalist. That's fine. But they talked about a lot of the ideology behind it in that Star Trek episode. Why having a weapon that could destroy your civilization, your entire land, was a bad idea. Why would anybody want it? As Adam said, mutually assured destruction makes me mad. It's completely pointless. What's really the mentality behind it? Now, oddly enough, if you watch the entire original Planet of the Apes series, there were 5 films. The last film, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, actually had things connected in a full circle. And the Alpha Omega bomb makes an appearance in deleted scenes, of course. They pulled it out, so now it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of people miss the point of the original Planet of the Apes series, that we're stuck in a cycle of destroying each other. It was actually giving a little bit of a hint. It was very on the nose, especially in the deleted scenes. Why would anybody have a weapon like this? Why would anybody ever design a weapon like this? Quite simple, it is mad, but oh yeah, we're going to allude to it. Now, of course, we can debate whether our current weapons could actually do something like this, or it's all just a bluff, as Captain Kirk says. Don't really know. Yes, we're assured we have the ability to destroy everything, but make of it what you will. Helena, I think I watched all of them. Yeah, and there was also that TV series in the 70s that was quite interesting. Old Roddy McDowell. You know, and I kind of miss the way that they portrayed the classic apes, but yeah, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. If you want to see an example of a doomsday bomb, that's it. All right, so that concludes our primary look. But we're going to do a little bonus here on frequency devices, because I thought you'd want to talk about that real briefly before we conclude for this live stream. And frequency devices. Well, what's one of the best examples I've come across of frequency devices in my explorations? And it is this little structure, although frankly, any cathedral, church, or basilica gives you a great example. But for those of you who are from Wisconsin or have been to Wisconsin, you are looking at Holy Hill, a basilica that is built out in the middle of a rural area, way outside of Milwaukee, on a giant hill. And yet it obviously has some very intriguing forms of frequency devices, cymatics. You know, I remember the exploration I did with Eileen McCusick. Was the window filled in? Well, oddly enough, these windows are not filled in. So I have to say that this particular structure actually backs up her theory that maybe there was a time when these windows were not filled in. Now, oddly enough, on the inside of the structure, you'll see that it has the wondrous window, all the other names that we have for it. I'm just going to call it a window, a portal. You know, there's many, many different names for it. It's oddly enough parked right by the organs. Now, officially, the structure was constructed early 1930s. Yes, another great project done during the Great Depression. But look, it's Catholic Church. They always have money. You know, we don't need to question that. Very, very interesting artwork, though. Yes, it's religious in nature. Maybe it is. Maybe it has some sort of profound effect that we don't know. But what's interesting about this structure is that it's parked on a hill that was noted during explorations by Jesuit missionaries in Wisconsin in the 1600s. It's always been a holy site. That's apparently why they built this basilica out in the middle of nowhere on a hill in Wisconsin. And to this day, it is a great site for a pilgrimage. And you can go there, and they've even got the little gift shop. And it's not just the single church building of the basilica, it's a large compound. There's several tunnels and everything that runs in the subterranean complex. I did an on-site exploration of this structure in the early days of the channel, but unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, it did not survive. Maybe I can find the footage and reassemble it if there's a demand. So, looks like Dubuque, doesn't it? Yes. Well, it's actually all in the same area. Good question. Where did the bells go? Don't know. Didn't exactly see. Jamie, great question. Bet you're not allowed to dig anywhere near it. Not only are you not allowed to dig anywhere near it, you are not allowed to fly drones anywhere around it. Although that shouldn't be a surprise. You know, there's a lot of places you're not allowed. But they've got several signs that say that you cannot and should not fly them there. So, yeah, compares to any of the great cathedrals in Europe, but they threw this up during the Great Depression in Wisconsin because, you know, it's a holy site. So make of it what you will. But there's a lot of examples, you know, on the inside. You can see some of the impressive architecture here. Oddly enough, some of these symbols seem to show something else. This is the inside of the Basilica on Holy Hill. I mean, I'm not even going to say anything. I'll just let you look and see what you see in some of this. Because oddly enough, you know, we talk about symbols a lot and we focus on them. let's just say these aren't exactly the symbols I'd expect to see inside a Catholic church, but whatever. Maybe they were doing something new, something different. I mean, you look at some of these figures, though, a little bit more closely, and you see some rather, we'll just say, unique things. Albie, griffins? If only it was just griffins. You're actually seeing something a little bit more direct than that. And here's the problem I have. I run into technical issues if I show higher perspective images. So I'm just showing you where this building is, and I'm showing you the interior and giving you some clues in terms of what's in the interior. Make of it what you will. So, yeah, maybe that's what we're looking at. Or maybe it's a skeksis. I'm not sure. It's probably just my imagination just running wild with me. Philip, yeah. Again, maybe just our imagination's running wild with us. I'm not really sure. And then, last but not least, this is a statue, of course, of George Washington. Although you might be surprised to know that this is in London. Yes, in the United Kingdom. And George has his famous, well, some might say it's a Gatling gun, but, it's actually a fasces. And the theory that we have around that being a sound weapon. Now, how do they explain a statue of George Washington being in London? Well, the official story says that the Commonwealth of Virginia, remember Virginia is a commonwealth, it's not a state just like Kentucky, they presented this as a gift to the United Kingdom in the early 1920s, to cement that special relationship that the United States and the United Kingdom has to this day. One day we'll have to talk about the Atlantic Charter. That's a very interesting charter too. So what's really the story? Sound frequency weapons that may have once been handheld as compared to the very large ones in the cathedrals or the basilicas? Or something else entirely going on? A hint of greater technology. That story is ridiculous. Oh, Casey, we always have to have one of those little stories. So. Well, and hey, Daily Donkey, a lot of people don't know about that there's a statue of George Washington in the United Kingdom. But, they got all kinds of unique things there. It's just like that statue of Alexander the Great they have in Scotland, because apparently Alexander the Great was really big in Scotland. Oh, and his horse is there, too. In Edinburgh. Maybe I said it right, so. Anyways. Totally above board. Yeah, why not? And Mr. Wynn, weapon of mass destruction. Maybe. And maybe a technology that's even beyond simple sound frequency and cymatics. I've alluded to that. But again, we don't know for sure. So, anyway. Well, I hope you enjoyed this exploration on the legacy of dark technology. We have to think about what may have been old world technology and how it was subverted or corrupted and applied in destructive ways. Because if you think about it, the old world construction had to be destroyed by corrupted technology that actually had the capability to destroy it. Because there's a lot of hints that the architecture that we have that's from the old world cannot be destroyed by classic means. Hey, Lane, Alexander the Great in Tennessee as well. Absolutely right. As is Sergeant Julius Caesar, right? I still remember that one in good old Nashville. Good to see you. So, anyway. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this unique technology exploration. We'll probably be looking at it a little bit more. And I'm going to work on see if I can restore a couple explorations that we've been missing. So anyway, well, before you go, please hit that like button. I appreciate everyone being here and supporting the channel. Welcome to the new members. And yes, Prime Explorers, I know I still have promised you a full Charles Berlitz exploration, and that is coming shortly. I'm waiting on one more file, and that will come out. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us. Hit that like button, and we will see you later this week. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off.